Craig, the new Williams FW35 has been launched to some controversy, and initially at the launch they seemed to be going out of their way not to let photographers too near.
That's right. There was only very long-range photographs of the car when it was rolled out in the pit lane. And as you say, controversy already around their exhaust outlet, which has had the FIA involved already this week. And that may well just be a smokescreen for the detail around the front wheels, where they've got a hollow front axle and they're actually ducting air to blow out in the middle of the wheel nut to have an aerodynamic effect behind the front tyre, which is something Red Bull did last year and had banned because their version was slightly outside of some of the rules. So yeah, it's definitely a very interesting car, the Williams this year.
Talk us through the Wheel Nut Saga. It actually goes back 3 or 4 years, doesn't it? There's a bit of an argy-bargy between Ross Brawn and Adrian Newey about 3 years ago over wheel nuts and what could be done or not done with them.
That's right. It goes back into various regulations which have sort of evolved over the years, which try and prevent you doing too much clever around the front wheels. Of which one of the things we saw was the wheel fairings that appeared in sort of 2008, 2009, and were subsequently banned. Last year, Red Bull ran a spiky extended front axle, which came out way past the wheel nut and had several holes machined into it. And this was exactly what Williams have this year. They were blowing air out of these holes through the middle of the wheel nut. And this, obviously, the high pressure air coming out has an effect on the airflow going around the front tyre, which is one of the problems that you can't get away from with Formula One being an open wheel formula. The problem that Red Bull had is because it came out past the wheel nut, these outlets, that they were banned, and Red Bull never got round to replacing them. What Williams have done, and actually at the launch, if you look at the front wheel nuts, there's tape covering over the middle of the wheel nut, so you couldn't see the axle, which was the first thing that attracted me that something was going on there. When you see the car running now, you can actually see that the axle is hollow and there's a small carbon fibre duct which just finishes flush with the end of the wheel nut and blows air out. So it's an interesting thing. I don't know if it's a massive advantage, but very interesting all the same.
So tell us where that air is now going and what they're doing with that air that other designers are not, other cars are not.
Well, they're scooping the air up with the normal front brake ducts, which obviously on Williams are quite intricate designs, and pioneered the effectively scoopless design of front brake duct that we looked at so much last year. But what's happening is the air is going through the axle. It's not going through the brakes. It's not there for cooling. This is purely air being ducted through the front axle for aerodynamic effect. That then comes shooting out of the middle of the front wheel. Then forms into the wake that forms up behind the front tyre, which is a low pressure area and causes lots of drag. So anything they can do to reduce the drag induced by the spinning front tyres, and obviously the rears, but this system isn't used on the rear at the moment, will reduce drag and obviously just gives you a small performance benefit. So very interesting.
On the basis that the suspension moves, as indeed the tyre pressure moves with the suspension, are we talking about a movable aerodynamic device?
Williams have been very careful. Red Bull's system last year was actually formed by the axle, which rotates. And although the definition that had that band wasn't because it was moving, what Williams have done is they've actually passed a duct up inside the large hollow axle. So the duct itself isn't moving, so there can be no question that this is a movable aerodynamic device. So they've been quite careful with the design on this.
And let's talk about the back then. You think it might be, excuse the pun, a bit of a smokescreen, all that exhaust kerfuffle. And we've also had a bit of that noise down at Caterham as well.
Yeah, it's basically both Caterham and Williams at the rear with the exhaust, the bodywork around the exhaust at the back of the side pod have stretched the interpretation of the rules a bit too far now. There's various rules, and sitting under these rules was a clarification that Charlie Whiting issued in November of 2011, just after they changed the exhaust rules. And some rules say that you can only have on each side one exhaust outlet. They also say that bodywork cannot pass over the exhaust gases. But the way the words are ruled, the way the rules are worded, is a little bit ambiguous because they're not talking about where the exhaust actually goes, where the exhaust gases go, but this imaginary truncated cone, as they say, which is effectively along the axis of the exhaust tailpipe, which points up. You can't have bodywork over that area. But what Williams and Caterham have done actually put bodywork under that area, which, according to the published rules, is legal. And in particularly with the Williams case, where they've gone to the effort of making sure that that doesn't form a completely enclosed channel over the exhaust plume, outwardly appears to beat the rules. But as I say, there is this technical directive that came out the very beginning of the season last year that said you cannot re-ingest exhaust gases, that you can't have any bodywork that's trying to manipulate the exhaust flow directly down, particularly if it's covering the top of the exhaust. So both the Caterham and the Williams fall foul of this rule, and they will have to change their exhaust bodywork at the back of the car to meet the new rules in time for Melbourne. It's not the greatest performance gain in the world, but it's a little thing that they've put on there. And I would imagine that Mike Coughlin actually put it on the back of the car just to avoid people looking at the front wheel nuts. They've done quite a lot of work around the front of the car. Obviously, at the first test at Jerez, they were running the FW34, the 2012 car, and already we saw that was running with a modesty panel hiding the step in the nose. So it was no real big surprise to see that when the FW35 was released on Tuesday, that it also had a modesty panel. But they've done a lot more work with the nose. It's quite Ferrari-like. They've done a lot of work with the front wing mounting pylons, bringing them right to the front of the nose and then hooking them back to mount at the very back of the rear wing to try and get the front wing mounts acting as turning vanes, which helps all of the aerodynamics along the back of the car. Front suspension, I mean, one of the great things with the Williams was its tyre management last year, and they've kept very much the front suspension as it was last year, and lots of the details around the back of the rear suspension as well seems to be carried over. So although it's been, I think the words Williams used has been refined, those areas of the mechanical parts of the car haven't really changed significantly.
And indeed, of course, at the back of the car, still that gorgeous low-line Williams gearbox.
Absolutely. It's it still amazes people when you look at the car in side profile, and it just looks as though the car ends at the back of the engine and somehow the rear suspension hangs on to nothing. They've got this tiny gearbox. It's been evolved this year, and the way that they're able to run the back of the rear ride height much higher this year. It's interesting to note that the drive shafts, which 2 years ago when they introduced this very low line gearbox, were angled upwards quite aggressively, and lots of people kind of struggled to understand how you could make drive shafts work at such an angle. This year's drive shafts are almost horizontal because the back of the car is riding so high now to get more dynamic performance out of the back of the car, that this low line gearbox and the problems it had with drive shafts seems to have gone away. So it's beautiful to look at.
Brilliant, Scarbs. Great to have your input as ever. And we'll have another chat, I think probably Barcelona 2, when we've got some of the latest pre-Melbourne mods. At the moment, interesting to see day by day, one team seems to be quickest and then another. Kind of depends on fuel load and tyres. We shouldn't be reading too much into what's going on at present. But one thing you've got to say is that the Lotus looks to be consistently quick, always in the top 2 or 3. You say you shouldn't read too much into testing times, but there is a pattern developing with that E21.
Exactly. I mean, they've had some technical issues over the past couple of tests, but fundamentally it looks like it is a very fast car, and it certainly seems to be up with the expected top 3, which just goes to prove this is going to be a really competitive year this year.
Very much so. Scarbs, I'll let you go. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Thanks very much, Peter.